So I'm just going to share a few case studies on what we've worked on recently, just talk about 3 projects on how we've used the volume to make the most of it, to complement the project and empower the creator. So I said, here's a couple of pictures from some recent productions we've had in there. The most exciting being Edenbound, which just came out on Friday, which is a sci-fi short film, which is all based within a spaceship with nice set build, and it's using virtual production. So, like I said, we're a studio, so we have studio hire. We also do production services, virtual art department, and mobile deployment. So we pretty much provide the end-to-end stuff on set for people. So the first project I want to talk about is this project we did for Tumi. So Tumi are a lifestyle travel brand, and essentially what they wanted to do was transport Son, who is the Tottenham Hotspur captain, into an immersive space where he could essentially then interact with all of the background. So if you saw on the title screen, there was a cube that was built. So that's a 3.5 meter walled cube, essentially with a mirrored floor. And what they wanted to do was be able to get him to come and perform, interact with all of the graphics that was on screen. And essentially, the biggest thing for them was creating that immersive space, but essentially, as he's a footballer, essentially we only had 3 hours with him on set. So we built the volume, we tested it, we had it deployed for 3 days, and then Son turned up to essentially do his piece, and we had to shoot a 30-second commercial in 3 hours. So essentially what we did is we had to bring Son in, who's a footballer, not necessarily media trained, but essentially get real performances out of him. So what was successful about that shoot was the ability to essentially create that 30-second commercial that went out on TV in the 3 hours. And the power of virtual production meant that he could actually see the rehearsal and performances in real time. So he had a body double who then kind of acted out the scene, and he was able to then stand in. He did 2 takes for each shot, and then moved on to the next scene. And obviously the cube was a big part of the commercial. So it was written into the commercial as the opening scene, and then once it flew into the cube, essentially he was then in an immersive space. And the beauty of virtual production also meant they could multi-use that volume. So not just the commercial, but all the pack shots that went along with it. So him carrying his suitcase, and then they had all the suitcases there. So they were able to shoot a whole sequence of end plates at the same time. The next project that we deployed, as you can see here, is a feature film. So we worked on a feature film the end of last year. So we were on set for 6 weeks, delivering all of the virtual production elements of a 12-week feature film. The talent was Daisy Ridley from Star Wars, and the director was Martin Campbell, who did Skyfall, Casino Royale, and essentially what you can see there is they built a skyscraper in the set in London, and we basically designed a system and a screen that could be flown around the set on a Manitou. So when we were looking in camera, essentially, this is what it's looking like inside the apartment. All the reflections on the glass from the screen, it looked realistic. So they were able to capture all of that in camera. Essentially, it saved them a lot of time in VFX and post-time, and it condensed the whole pipeline to get that feature film out. Something that was really successful about it was actually the dailies that were coming from the shoot. So they were telling us essentially, until they used virtual production on the project, they were getting loads of trouble every night when the producers were seeing the dailies from the shoot. When they had VP, they were like, "This looks amazing," and it just sped up the whole of the process. So yeah, and it meant they could actually, you know how feature films work, they release funding in chunks. Essentially, they were able to release the funding a lot easier because they were able to see what was in camera, not leaving it up to the imagination of the funders and the producers to think about how it might look when it gets into post and VFX. A big thing in feature films is time. So we had to think about exactly what hardware we were using. So Brompton was deployed with Disguise on that, so we had the flexibility to essentially, in real time, change the nits, change the color, add mats onto the sky, because the DOP would literally give us 10 seconds. I need it left, 5 clicks up, 200 nits, and take some blue out of there, essentially. So we had to have that flexibility with our operator to be able to make changes like that, because when the director says action, it needs to be ready, and it needs to be robust. Edenbound is the sci-fi feature I was talking about. So that's an indie budget. So essentially the brief here was they had £30,000 to spend on creating a 20-minute, 15-minute, 20-minute feature film, which is going out in the film festivals this year. The exciting thing about this project was essentially the spaceship. Here, the main focus of this was actually the set design. So it's a great example where the set design is actually doing all the talking and the virtual production part is just there to complement it. It was kind of just a playback tool used in the background, but every scene in this was shot within the spaceship. She flies up to space, essentially crash land somewhere, and the whole thing was captured in virtual production. We were able to create that 20-minute short film in essentially 2 days. So we had 2 prep days where we did a pre-light, and then essentially that short film was shot in the space of 2 days. What was really good about this project was essentially the crew had never shot on a virtual production volume before. So it was all new to them. But essentially when you're shooting in VP, it's still traditional techniques that are used. You know, it's getting the lighting right. And the DOP and the whole of the crew were able to execute that sci-fi film with having no experience. They just did a test day in advance. So it gave them that ability to get the experience on the volume, but the final product looks amazing. You wouldn't know they hadn't shot on VP before. So VP doesn't have to be this big scary thing that most people think it is, and actually it's achievable. It's essentially a background sometimes, that's all it is. It's a set. For this, all the environments were created in Unreal Engine, but to simplify it on the day, we actually rendered them out as video plates. So there was no camera tracking used on that project, but it essentially means that we were just doing simple playback. We were using DaVinci Resolve to play that back, and then there was no problems where things would go down, essentially. So we were able to then maximize those 2 days. And they were just 10-hour days to capture that whole thing. I think ultimately virtual production it's grown a lot over the last few years. If you walk around the show, you're going to see there's tons and tons of VP stuff here. It's now real, and the hype curve of post-pandemic has happened. Essentially now it's how do you utilize it and use it properly? And we're seeing so many different companies and sectors now choosing to use virtual production, all the way from high-end corporate talking head content all the way through to feature films. But it's not just reserved for the big budgets. That's the point. Essentially, you can do a lot in the space of a day. So if I was to give you some key takeaways from this, essentially, the main thing to think about with virtual production is it's a tool at the end of the day. It's a solution. It might not be the right thing for everything, but once you work out what you can use it for, it can save you a lot of hassle. Now, that might be you're looking to be more efficient on set. You want to be more sustainable. Whatever these things are, you want to lean into those things. So when we're pitching these projects, essentially we're saying it's about efficiencies. Well, don't have to move a unit. We can do 6 locations in one day. We could do 1 location every hour. You know, we could be in Paris, London, on the moon, all in the same day, shooting day and night. And essentially, when you think about virtual production, typically some people consider it quite late in the journey of them putting it into the project. But as the example I showed you at the beginning, the Toomey with the cube, virtual production was decided in the pitch process. So essentially, you're able to elevate your ideas and the creative when you recognize you're going to use it early on, and then lean into that. So you can really push the ideas of the project. So if you thought it was going to be based in Arizona in a desert, then why not push the creative to be on the moon, underwater, wherever it might be? So yeah, it's really good in terms of pushing the creative ideas and getting more ambitious with it. We're seeing a lot more now where the physical set is being married up to the virtual set. So early last year, it was more playback, people performing in front of it. And every time a client comes in to then use virtual production, they're getting more ambitious. So they're starting to say, how do I marry those two up? So it might be using decking or flooring that rolls into the virtual environment. It could be building a spaceship, essentially. It could be building a forest. We've kind of seen everything. But essentially, you're able to do a lot more when you start thinking about the set design that goes with the project, and not just thinking about it as a playback tool. So yeah, I think if that was useful to you, but essentially, yeah, happy to have a chat with everyone if you want to talk about anything in virtual production, but essentially utilize it, get to grip with it. So there's loads of great studios in the US, there's a great studio in Austin, with Nate over here. There's a studio in Las Vegas with view, so if anyone wants to get out and see a VP stage, there's one 10 minutes away from here. They're happy to show you around as well. And if anyone's ever in London anytime, give us a shout and we'll show you around the studio. Cool, thanks.